Today we are going to see how to create the Kassadin Slash. Hi, I'm Gabriel Aguiar, currently developing Rabbit's Tail, links below for more. And I wanted to recreate this effect for quite some time now, and today I'm gonna show you how to achieve a simplified version of the Kassadin He ability, also known as the Force Pulse from League of Legends. There are some very interesting tricks here that we are going to see, so let's jump right into this. Oh, and if you wanna get this project, it's all available on my Patreon page, where there is many more assets for you to study up close or use them in your games. Links below. And I'm gonna show you how to build the mesh from scratch. We are going to use Blender because it's free. And the first thing we wanna do is select everything with A and press delete. We want a clean scene. Then we can add with Shift A cylinder. On this left bottom panel, you can control the vertex and, most importantly, the cap fill type. We wanna set it to nothing. We basically only want a ring. Let's enter in edit mode with tab. Select everything with A, press R to rotate, lock it in the Y axis, rotate it 90 degrees, and press enter. Then we are going to drag a new window from this left bottom corner. We are going to switch this to UV editor. It's really important we get the UVs right for this to work out. Up here I'm going to turn on UV sync selection, and on UV enable constraint to image bounds. Let's press Z to see through, and then go to the right orthographic view by pressing 3 on the numpad, and we want to select the right side. As you can see in our UV editor, we have selected the extremities of the UVs. We are only going to use the stripes on the middle. We are going to delete this right side, select everything and rotate it in the Z axis 180 degrees. Now with S, I'm gonna lock it in the Y and I'm gonna scale this up just like this. And once again with S, scale it down in the Z axis. Alright. Let's scale this up in the X axis only. Let's increase the wide, exactly. And now, let's fix the UVs, by the way. It's very simple. Press S, lock it in the X, and scale this up. But as you can see, the right side represents the bottom of our mesh, and the left side the top of our mesh. What I'm going to do, in the UV editor, press Ctrl Tab and select Faces. I'm going to select the bottom part. I'm going to press G, lock it in the X, and push it all the way to the left. And then with R, we are going to rotate this 180 degrees. What we are doing is creating a mirror of the UVs. The top and the bottom part will be the same. Now let's select everything with A, move it with G on the X axis a value of 0.25. So it's centered. All we gotta do is press S to scale it in the X only, all the way until it touches the extremities. And the text and the shade we are going to create are going to work from the top to the bottom, top being most visible and bottom less visible. So I'm gonna select everything with A and rotate it minus 90 degrees. As you can see, it goes from the top to the bottom once we select each face. Exactly like this, looking good. This is extremely important, otherwise the effect won't work. The UVs are helping us map the texture properly to this mesh. If you are developing for mobile, be careful with this next step. We are going to use Ctrl R to add 3 edge loops. Scroll up, press enter, so they stay in the right position, and then escape. And I'm going to switch the selection with Ctrl Tab to Vertex. Select this bottom vertex. And if we scale this, we are not influencing the other vertices around. What we can do is turn on proportional editing up here. We have here a few graphs on how it's going to influence the vertices around. And we can select the sharp graph. And once we press S, you can scale up or down to control the influence. And the idea is to lock it in the X, by the way. Shrink this so it's thinner at the bottom and it's going to be larger in the front. That's what we are trying to do here. Now we are going to select these 3 vertices in the front, press G and move it in the Y only. But we need to switch the graph of the proportional editing to a sphere and move it in the Y with G maybe less influence. Alright, looking good. I'm gonna select the 3 vertices on the left and the 3 vertices on the right in the front and scale them only in the X so it becomes wider in the front, as you can see. Control the influence by scrolling up or down. I'm actually going to use a sharp graph up here. Alright, looking good. Maybe increase a little bit, and that's pretty much it. Obviously you can play a little bit more, but we have reached a nice point with our mesh, so we are going to move on. We are going to smooth this. As you can see, we have faces here. I'm going to press spacebar and search for shade smooth. You can go to object, and right here you have shade smooth as well. And yeah, I'm going to scale this a little bit down, but that's essentially it. Now we can rename this. I'm going to call it the Kassadin Slash 02, and then we are going to increase the poly count with a modifier called subdivision surface. Set the render to 1. Be careful if you are on mobile, by the way, because we are increasing the faces. Once you have achieved a shape similar to this one, we can go ahead and before exporting we need to press Ctrl A to apply the rotation and scale. Then we can go to File and export FBX. I'm going to export directly to my Unity project and turn on selected objects, so it exports only the slash. Alright, looking good. And if we go back to Unity now, in our mesh, I'm going to say that the scale factor is 100. That's one step down, and it was an hard one because this mesh is a little bit more complex. Now, let's go ahead and create a VFX graph so we can use the mesh however we want. Rename it to VFX Graph _ Kassadin Slash, for example, and drag and drop it to your scene. And press the Edit button to enter VFX Graph. I'm gonna dock it right here. And, well, the first thing we want to do is we don't want to constantly spawn Kassadin Slashes, right? We just want a single burst with one particle each time we play this. Right? And down here we don't want to output a particle, we want to output the mesh we created. So output particle mesh. Exactly. Now in here we are able to assign the mesh we created like this. Cool. Let's control the size with the set size. I'm gonna set it to 1 and press play, and it's huge and vertical. Alright, so at this point I'm gonna turn on shaded wireframe so I can see the orientation of this mesh. Alright, I need to rotate it in the X. We are going to do it in a moment. For now, let's say that lifetime is going to be constant. 1 second for the lifetime is enough, and remove the set velocity. We are going to create the motion in a different way. You will see in a moment. For now, let's use a set angle and rotate this -90 degrees in the X. As you can see, our particle system, our VFX graph is right here, but our mesh should be starting as well right here. What's happening is the pivot point, we need to push it all the way back. It's very simple. All we gotta do is select, make sure you don't have anything selected, and then select these 4 vertices. Press Ctrl S while you are in edit mode and select cursor to selected. Let's get out of the edit mode by pressing tab again. Now with Ctrl Shift Alt C, we are going to say origin to 3D cursor. If this shortcut does nothing to you, you can go up here to object and you have set origin right here. Alright, and then we can export this FBX once again, replace the existing mesh you have in your project. And here we go, the mesh now starts at the right position. That's where we want this mesh to be. Alright, so I'm going to switch this back to shaded, and now let's take care of the motion. By the way, you can control the scale down here in case you want this to be thinner, or in case you want to stretch this. You can still adjust it in Unity without opening Blender. The way we control the motion now is with a set scale over life, where each curve will control a different axis. In this case, the Z is how tall it is. Let's start by selecting the default line. Copy and paste it to the X and Y. And for example, the X will control the height, and the Y, it will control how long it is. Let's start with that. And let's select a diagonal line, but we want this to happen much faster. On the last key, let's press with right click and select edit key. And the time it's going to be 0.2, but the value is going to be something like 0.95. It's not going to grow entirely until it reaches the maximum size. Let's add another key and say the value is 1 and the time 1. We don't want this curvature, so on the second key, right click and clamp it auto. Exactly, it grows fast and then it keeps growing a little bit until it reaches its maximum size. Let's copy this curve and paste it to the scale X, and here we go. We have taken care of the scale. You can obviously test different curves and different motions. I highly recommend you to do so because you will learn a lot. And now for the motion, we are going to use the update particle section at the set velocity over life. Once again, each curve controls a different axis, and for the X we can start with the line, but it cannot be 1, otherwise it will move in the X a little bit. So delete the last key, right click on the first key and say the value is 0. Let's do the same thing for the Y, because the Z will control if it goes forward or backward. In my specific case, it's not facing the Z axis, it's facing the opposite direction. So for the Z, the first key, it's going to start at -20. Since we want this to move faster, the time it's going to be 0.2 and the value 0. Alright, exactly like this. It scales up and it moves forward a little bit. That's the motion of the Kassadin attack, the Kassadin Slash. Right, so we need to improve aesthetically how it looks, and in this specific case we are going to need a texture created in Photoshop or in Krita. I'm going to use Krita because it's free and you can follow along easily. So I'm going to create a new file with 2048 by 2048, black background, and on this empty layer I'm going to select brush, B for shortcut, and then use this hairbrush soft with around 600 pixels, and I'm going to press Shift W to enter in wrap mode, and now we are going to create the curvy line like this. And then let's go up here to the brush presets and select the Blender smear brush, and now we can push this up and down until we have this slashed line. You can even use a motion blur if you want after this. I'm gonna fast forward this because it's a repetitive process where you push some lines up and others down. You can also use the hairbrush soft and the erase tool to remove some of these white spots. We want a nice balance between gray and white. You get the idea of the texture you need and the techniques that I use. It just takes a while to get a good texture and patience. After you have achieved this point, don't forget to turn off wrap mode. You can hide the black background and export this as a PNG directly to your Unity project. In Unity, you can assign this new texture to your VFX graph. It's black and white because all face transparency is disabled. You can turn it on and apply in the texture settings. And here we go. We are starting to see something a little bit closer to the Kassadin Slash. I'm gonna turn on shaded wireframe so you can see that we need to scroll this from the bottom of our mesh to the top of our mesh, to the front, right? And that's when a shader becomes super useful. So right click in a folder and I'm gonna create you can start with a blank shader graph or an unlit shader graph. I'm gonna rename this to Kassadin shader just because it's a Kassadin Slash tutorial. In here, we are going to need a color property. It's going to be in HDR mode, white, alpha to 100%. And then we are going to need a texture 2D for the main text. Let's drag and drop it and let's sample this. By the way, you can already assign the slash you have created. And the way we scroll this, in this specific case, we are going to use a tiling and offset node, and that's the only node we need. Connected to the UV input, as you can see, the Y will control exactly what we want. So let's create a vector 2 and call it the main text offset. Connect it here. Oh, and let's multiply the sample text to the D with the color and connect this to the base color. As you can see in the preview, by the way, it's black and white once again because we are not controlling the transparency. In the shader, we need to say that the surface type, it's going to be transparent instead of opaque. And now the last node, we can split it and we have access to the alpha, which is the transparency. And we can connect it right here to the alpha input of the fragment function. If we save this, we can use the shader in VFX Graph it doesn't appear here because in the shader, in shader graph, we only have to turn on support VFX graph. And that's it. Don't forget to save. And now you can assign the shader to VFX graph. Alright, so the way we are going to use this, the main text offset, it's only the Y we need in this case. We are going to start at something like 0.75, for example, and go all the way, if you look here to the beginning of the mesh, all the way to minus 0.6 or something like that. But as you can see, this keeps on scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. In this case of the Kassadin Slash, we don't want this to scroll. So in the wrap mode of the texture, instead of repeat, we want to say clump. So it doesn't repeat the texture every time we scroll. You can apply this change. If you scroll up and down in the Y of the main text offset, it doesn't repeat anymore. That's exactly what we need. We want this texture to go from the beginning to the end of our mesh without repeating. And the way we do it now is with a sample curve. We are going to go from something like 0.75 to minus 0.6, for example. So in this curve, let's select this diagonal line. The first key, it's going to be minus 0.75, and the last key, it's going to be something like 0.6, 0.65. Let's see how it goes. If you connect this to the Y, nothing will happen because the time value is at 0. We need to animate this time input. Fortunately, we have the age over lifetime node, which goes from 0 to 1, and it represents the lifetime of this mesh, which is 1 second. As you can see, oh, yeah, it's animating backwards. Interesting. That's totally fine. The first key, instead of minus 0.75, it's going to be 0.65 or something like that. And the last key, it's going to be minus 0.7. We need to switch the values and, oh, nice, looking good. Look at this. We are scrolling the texture perfectly. If you want now, you can adjust these values so it starts a little bit before the mesh, as you can see. But that's it. We have the main feature of this Kassadin Slash. So let's add some color to this. I already have some values in case you want to copy them. It's 3.4 for red, 1.15 for green, and 31 for blue. But as you can see, this is super intense. It doesn't fade in, it doesn't fade out. So what we can do is use a gradient. We are going to sample a gradient. Let's first copy this color. On this gradient, we are going to paste the color to the last key. Remove these keys up here, which are for the alpha. Only leave the white one and the black one at the end. And the first key of the color, we can paste the color, but decrease the intensity. Then we can click close to the first key, drag a little bit to the right, click again close to the second key, and drag a little bit to the right. And let's test this out. Let's connect the age of our lifetime to the time and the gradient to the color. And yeah, it's very dull for some reason. We have copied the color, but alright, last key needs to be more intense, around 6. Oh yeah, looking good. Becomes brighter and brighter. That's nice. What we are going to do now is a little trick in the shader. If you want to know more about shader graph, make sure to check out my channel. There's plenty of tutorials there that will help you out. What we are going to do is mix a noise texture with our main texture, so it isn't so intense. Spacebar and search for simple noise, scale of 40 more or less. And to this we are going to add a gradient. It's going to go from white to black. And we can get that gradient from the UV node. If we split this, the G channel represents that gradient. Cool. All we gotta do now is multiply this with our main texture before multiplying with the color and replace this connection, and we are good to go. May not seem like much, but our main texture now looks a little bit less intense and a little bit more random. It adds a nice texture, a nice touch. There's plenty of tricks you can do. The last one I'm gonna show is we can connect this to a power node, and the power node will create a little bit more contrast, as you can see, and this will in some ways dissolve a little bit our main texture. As you can see, in the beginning it looks pretty damn dissolved, and at the end it becomes bright, and we still see the noise. So that's it, that's pretty much it. What we can do now is add some dark tones to this, increase the trail it leaves behind. For example, it's very simple. We can go back to VFX Graph, rename this output to bright slash, copy this name, select everything, and we right click, create a group, rename the group to be the same name, Select the group, and with Ctrl C and Ctrl V we are going to duplicate this. It's going to be called the dark slash. And on this case we need to change the texture, the main texture. So let's go back to Krita, and it's very simple. Let's duplicate this texture, hide the other one, the original one, enter in wrap mode with Shift W, and then with Ctrl T we are going to increase this, but be careful to not clip the main texture, otherwise it won't look good. Once it is almost touching the boundaries, you want to duplicate this, push it below or up. We are basically thickening this. We need this text to be thicker, right? Just like this. Always make sure you don't clip your texture. Then you can get out of the wrap mode with Shift W, hide the black background, and export this, for example, as dark slash 03 in my case, and as a PNG. That's very important. And in Unity, now we can assign this to the dark slash. Let's turn on alpha transparency, apply. Oh yeah, we clearly need to set the wrap mode to clamp so it doesn't keep on repeating this texture. Exactly. Apply. Okay, we don't see dark tones because this gradient is way too intense. So let's open this up, delete the last key and the third key of the color. Push the second key all the way to the end and the first key to more or less around here. Create another key to the beginning, completely black, and here we go. The dark slash is on top of the bright slash. We can fix that by selecting the VFX graph in the folder, and in the inspector we can say the dark slash is rendered before the bright slash, exactly like this. Okay, looking good. Now we are leaving some dark trails behind. We can increase that effect on the offset curve, this one. Basically, we want the dark slash to begin earlier, so let's push this first key up to around 1.2, 1.3. And the last key, let's push it up to around -0.6, for example. And here we go. Looking very good. We are leaving some dark trails behind. That's a really nice touch in my opinion. You can now play a lot with this. For example, the lifetime could be shorter. You can create a property for these two lifetimes, for example, and control it in the inspector. But something quicker, you can achieve it like this. For the offset curves, you can also make sure that it slows down at the end. So we see the bright at the end a little bit longer. That's what I did here with this curve right here. And then I added some particles. And if you want to learn more about VFX Graph, make sure to check out my channel. You are going to learn so much more, and you are going to be able to recreate these particles, for example. Plus, if we want to get these projects and many others, everything is available on my patrons page. For a very low fee, you can get all of this and study this up close or even use it in your games. It's all available there, links below. And a big thank you goes to each patron that supported me last month. And as usual, a quick shout out to the top tier patrons, which are 3D Sorcery, Alexandre Carvalho, Alpera Arichai, Achilles Benitez, Aviat Tobali, Kainarino, Silona, Krubidubidu, Cybercradle, Daniel Schmidt, Dave Game Dev, Diego Marques, Duitron, Effect Yellow, El Sharif, Gilles Walter, Goblin Plague, Guilherme Trindade, KC Miller, Kenan Anselm, Lucky Campbell, Lee Ann Alt, Mark Anom, Michael Gann, Michael Late, Moa, Mortar, Naru, Nat Sims, Oitsk, Pradeep Sen, Radioactive Bullfrog, Ratchanan, Revenant Games, Very Suta, Will Hughes, Will Poilion, Dang Mao Dong, and Cheng Pianling. Thank you all for your amazing support. You keep this channel going. I hope you have enjoyed this video and all the assets on Patreon. And to anyone who watched this, I hope to see you on the next video. And thanks for watching. Bye.